Welcome everybody to another edition of Project Spotlight. I'm super excited for our guest this month. I have Tom Englert from the ResX project. Tom, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, say hello, and talk about ResX in general?
Hello? Yep.
Awesome. So for folks that might not know, what ResX is, do you want to give a quick little intro as to what the project is and how it can be valuable for .NET developers?
ResXManager is a small project that gives you a decent overview of all your resources in any solution. So because of the built-in ResX tool is very limited, it shows you one file for one language at one time. And with ResXManager, you can see all the content of all the files of all languages in one big grid. So it's very easy to localize a solution on the fly.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think one of the things that, developers, it's always at the end of a project, right? We talk about, okay, so how can we make our project or the work that we're doing more accessible to non-English speakers or people that have different keyboard layouts or what have you, right? So my first question for you is, what led you to want to build something like this? What was the motivation behind it?
I just struggled with an old project. It was a WinForms project, and it was localized the WinForms way. And yeah, it was. I felt unable to maintain it in that way. So
sure.
I needed some better solutions. So I started with that project.
Awesome.
I think it was at least 8 years ago. Yeah.
Oh wow! So you've been doing this for a while. So, it sounds to me like you got started building this solution as, something to make your life as a developer easier, right? At what point in time did you realize, hey, I bet a lot of people could take advantage of this? Like, was there a tipping point? Like, did you put it on GitHub initially and people were kind of interested in it? Or was it something where after you had completed the work that you needed to be successful, did you then say, I bet a lot of people have this? This need to enable better support of localization?
There was no special trigger about
sure.
it. One day I just thought, hey, why not just put it on the make it available for the folks and see what happens.
Yeah.
And it quickly turned out that many people loved that and voted for it and gave input to it and have requests and issues and things like that. And this way it started growing.
Yeah, it sounds like the community they saw this, the work that you did, and they said, this is great, let's attach to this and let's make sure that it continues, right? Because what happens with a lot of projects is that the maintainer, they move on to other things, and sometimes projects get stagnant, right? But it sounds to me like the community embraced the work that you're doing and they've helped you build on it. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ways the community has helped you take this from a personal project that you needed to get done for your work into something that's used by lots and lots of .NET developers out there?
Yeah, just by giving input,
Yeah.
via issues and comments and things like that.
Sure.
I think why it's so continuously maintained is mainly because I use it myself very often.
Yeah.
So, and that I think is a key trigger for a successful project, that developers themselves use that and get an idea of how it feels to use it.
Sure. I think one of the things that's really important to call out too with, not just .NET development, but technology in general, right, is that a lot of the work that people do, it's all, based off of some form of English, right? Like most programming languages write code in English. Most of the acumen around technologies, especially .NET, is in English. And, one of the things that I think is really, really impactful is when people that aren't native English speakers or they speak other languages other than English, they have a different approach to how .NET can be successful to those areas, right? So from your perspective, obviously, I think one of the things that you probably saw is that when you build apps, you need to be able to accommodate anybody who uses the app, regardless of what their languages are, right? So is there a particular reason why, you mentioned that it was a part of a project, but initially, like, what was the reason for, like, that project to be more localized, right? To have an idea of multi-language support or things like that? Like, what was the underpinning goal? Was it just that you had an application that was used by people all over the world, or was it something that you felt like would be beneficial to the app that you were writing at the time?
Oh, it was a requirement for the app
Sure.
itself.
Yeah.
Most of the apps I'm working on have the requirement for localization, and
Okay.
of course, we always need to support at least English and German for all our applications that we write.
Sure. Then that's great. So, one of the things that I think is really, really interesting about ResX is that you have this ability to compartmentalize all of the different options for localization, right? So initially you said you kind of talked a little bit about, German and English, but at this point, like, what is the language support outside of English and German?
For the ResXManager, is any language that Windows
Sure.
supports.
Yeah, of course. That's awesome. I mean, and have people from communities that they don't speak English or German, have they reached out to you and kind of given you their thoughts on how to better encompass or better, I guess you could say, attract developers that are in that space? I guess my point is obviously English is very important to a lot of developers, and German is very important for the customers that you had at that time, right? And probably you to an extent. But obviously, like, there's Spanish, there's French, there's Italian, right? And all these different developers have different needs. Have you had conversations with folks in that space where they talk about, I'm a developer who lives in Spain, or I speak Spanish primarily, and, ResX has helped me, be more efficient in how I build apps?
Well, I think it's true for any language.
Sure.
Yeah? I got feedback from many projects having translations in 10 or 20 languages at the same time.
Yeah. And I think, go ahead. You want to finish?
Just then finished. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I think as well that's really, really cool about ResX is it's an extension, right? So, like, this concept that you can easily add it to Visual Studio and it sort of magically works. I checked it out yesterday, and I was just very surprised on, like, the initial setup was very easy, right? So when you when you went down that path, right, of, like, trying to figure out a way to make sure that the onboarding experience for the extension was good, like, what are some of the things that you thought about?
Sorry, I didn't get the last sentence.
Sorry, I'll repeat. So basically, when you first started building the extension and the goal was for Visual Studio users to be able to use it, what were some of the things that you were thinking about to ensure that everybody had a very, very easy process to get started with it?
Well, I think it did nothing special for that. It's just built in the Visual Studio extensions. You install them and it works.
Yeah.
This was thanks to the work of Microsoft or Visual Studio, that you can so easily deploy an extension and someone clicks install and it starts working.
Yeah, I think you're being a bit modest, right? I think one of the things that I think that I see when I see people who go down this path of giving back to community, right? There's a lot of, I just did it, and the technology that I was using enabled me to be successful, right? But I think you could take definitely some credit for the effort that you put into making sure that, yes, installing a Visual Studio extension is fairly easy, but, from personal experience as a developer, sometimes Visual Studio extensions are hard to configure, right? And I think one of the benefits and the things that I really appreciate about ResX is how easy it is to configure. And like you mentioned, like the multi-language support, and you mentioned that it just empowers developers who want to care about localization, who should be caring about localization, to be able to add it to their apps very seamlessly. Yeah. I think, one of the things that I love as well is that you have all your code out on GitHub, right? I mean, so what what has been your experience of putting your work out on GitHub and the community? Like you mentioned, the community has been great and they've opened issues and comments. Have you had like substantial contributions to your project from the community, like whether it be pull requests or just really discussions that made you think a bit differently?
Yeah, mostly discussions, but also some pull requests, some features like some runtime checks about delimiters and stuff like this, or the check for formatting parameters that they match up in every language. So if you have string format placeholders in, they should be the same in all language, and ResX instantly checks that and points out an error. This was, or for example, the Chinese translations were contribution by some Chinese guys and things like that. Yeah.
That's awesome. So one of the things I would love to hear about is that, what are some things that that ResX doesn't do right now that someday that you would like to, it's like, it would be great if ResX did this particular thing. Is there anything that's on your radar of things that you'd like to introduce to ResX in the future?
Well, I think there are a lot of issues I never taken care of. Because, I do the stuff what I think is useful, but and I have time to do this. But if you want to contribute, just go to the GitHub page and look for the all the many issues that have the label up for grabs. And there are a lot of ideas which might be interesting to some particular people, but not for the mainstream. So I had no time. Since I had no time to do this, if someone wants to contribute, this is a good place to start.
Yeah, I definitely agree. One of the things that I always tell people is that if you feel that the software that you use that's open source, if it's missing something that's valuable to you, reach out to the maintainer or the major contributor, and if they don't have the bandwidth, or maybe they maybe don't see your vision. Like, the reason why open source repositories are so great is you have the ability to submit pull requests to. Obviously, I don't think Tom is just going to merge in every PR that he sees, but I think that one of the things that he'd really appreciate is to, if somebody has an idea or something, the conversation is definitely a great way to start. Also, from my opinion, if you maybe aren't as comfortable as contributing directly to ResX, I think one of the things that Tom would probably appreciate is documentation, right? Like, one of the things that I always see with open source repositories is that the developers love to write the code, but the documenting is a bit more on the fence, right? Like, Tom, do you welcome anybody who wants to help you document ResX at this point?
Of course, yes, that's a good point. I really forgot about that. But there is a decent documentation, but not every detail of every feature, of course, is documented.
Of course.
And well, it's many things are self-explaining, but sometimes I got feedback from people. Oh, I didn't know that this feature exists. If I had known this before, I would be very happy.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I highly advise people that if you're taking advantage of ResX, or if you care about localization, multi-language support for your apps, like check a look at ResX, and if you see something that's missing that you might need, it sounds to me like Tom is way excited about somebody coming in and helping out, not just with writing code, but the documentation as well. So that's, I want to, as we wrap up, and I want to thank Tom again so much for chatting with me. One of the things I want to just quickly hit on is, so ResXManager is a .NET Foundation project. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the .NET Foundation has helped you as a maintainer of a fairly well-used .NET Foundation project?
Yeah, especially in making it more aware to the community. And getting also getting true certificates that you don't always have to click. Oh, I agree to this and that before you can start the application.
No, I think that's
one thing. Because one thing to mention, this is not only Visual Studio extension; it's also available as a standalone
Yes.
application, as a click once.
Yeah.
So whenever you don't have the appropriate Visual Studio available or an external translator, you can use just this without you having to install Visual Studio.
Yeah, no, that's a good crate. And thank you so much for calling that out. It's not just inside of the development experience side of Visual Studio, but literally for, it comes, like you said, in a standalone instance, and I think it's really, really valuable for folks to think about too. So thank you for calling that out. And, as we wrap up, again, Tom, I want to thank you so much for chatting with us. For the folks that are tuning into this video, so please check out the rest of the Project Spotlight page for ResX. There's some great information about how to get in touch with Tom and give back to ResX if you're using it or if you feel like you want to take part. And again, Tom, thank you so much for hopping on. And do you have any closing words to say?
Oh, just, contribute, use it, give feedback, and I'm happy.
I mean, that's all that matters. Make Tom happy, people. He wants to be happy, so let's make Tom happy. Thank you so much again, Tom, and for everybody tuning in, enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.